So I titled this Battle Scars, okay? I'll go into a little bit about kind of who I am and my journey. I'm trying to not make this too self-serving, but I have to talk about myself if I'm going to talk about kind of what's been learned a little bit. But before I get into that, I kind of want to get you guys to know a little bit about me. Okay, so I'm 39. I'm the age nobody believes anybody is, right? Everybody that says they're 39 is usually older, and they're fighting off turning 40. I actually turn 40 next month, so it's a proud age. And in those 39 years, where I am now is I'm the founder of Far Out Venture. I have two co-founders, and we primarily focus on pre-seed and seed marketplaces and vertical SaaS, and ideally the intersection between the two of them. I also sit on a handful of boards, primarily around hospitals. That's just kind of it's got nothing to do with my background, but it's kind of what I care about. Also, I've helped create a tech-enabled vertical farm. I write a weekly newsletter about the startup ecosystem in Buffalo called Buffalo Bridge. And I'm a dad and soon to be a husband. My fiance's sitting in the front row, so nobody get any ideas. So all right, so who am I? This is my family. I'm a family guy. Even though I am a VC, I really am a founder and an operator. And I think that's important for the founders that are in the room to understand kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing, and then also the way you will look at investors. If you get the chance to pick who your investors are, which a lot of times you don't. We really didn't get to pick early on. We kind of had to scrape and borrow just to get the money we needed. I'm a normal guy. I'm a guy that likes to plant trees, goes on hikes. I follow my gut and my heart way more than I follow a calculator, but I am a numbers guy too. That's why you'll see a lot of numbers up here. I think I probably give too many chances to people around me, and you'll hear how that's created a lot of scars. But I'm lucky that I can afford to do that, and I don't just mean financially. I mean, I think that there is something to putting yourself out there and taking chances. So this is a little bit about what I've done. These all have relevance. So my unique story was at 12, I became the head of my household. My father moved out, and I remember the day that my mom set the table and I sat at the head of it. And that's the first time I really felt what it was like to be responsible for more than myself. While also helping run a family business, of which I exclusively ran while I was at college, with my dad in the hospital. I earned 2 degrees, but they weren't in what I originally went to school for. I originally wanted to be an architect, and then later on thought about being a doctor, and I couldn't do either of those while running business. I went too far. Sorry. I worked, when I graduated from business school, I worked for 7 months basically for free to get into venture capital. I wanted to do it in the town I was from, which is Rochester, New York. It's a town of about 1 million people in upstate New York. And it was one of the toughest things I had to do because here I was, this was 2008, right before everything kind of went to hell. So all my classmates had big jobs in New York City, and I was literally making nothing, working 50, 60 hours a week. I then served 4 years as an independent consultant working in the venture space. After that, I had been with a fund for a little while, then did that. I had 1 child and founded 1 unicorn the exact same month, which was very interesting. And at my startup at ACV, I was the CFO, the COO, head of strategy, and data analytics, which was way too much. You can understand there were a lot of scars that came from that. I was at ACV for about 5 years. And after leaving that, I don't know how many exited founders there are in the room, but for the next 3 years, I felt like I didn't do enough when I was there for the people around me, for the people that helped me get there. So for 3 years, I almost fully committed to the ecosystem of where I lived at that time, which was, and where I live now in Buffalo, New York, another city of about 1 million people, pretty close to Rochester. I've had 8 real jobs. And over those 3 years, I guess this is important, I invested or gave away 100% of what I made at ACV. So I'll get into a little bit why I did that. I've had 8 real jobs in my life. I've been fired from every single one of them, including ACV. That's not when I left. That was early on, and I was brought back about 5 weeks later, but obviously there was some damage from that. I've personally hired over 600 people and had to let go of about 100 of them. It sucks. There's some emotional baggage that comes from that. I've helped start 43 companies as a founder in 3 of them, and then as kind of the guy at the table that's shaping it in the other 40. I founded the first institutional VC in my city in Buffalo. Far out's the first time that there's private capital in the world I live in, which was a big deal to me. And I finally actually focused on me and met the love of my life, and I have a family now. So, all right. So ACV, really quick. This is me and my son. It's a B2B marketplace founded in 2014. Like Max said, we sell about 750,000 cars a year, about 11 billion GMV. Those are really big numbers, right? Really big, impressive numbers. We have about 2,000 employees. What you don't know is ACV is just like all these startups that start to get to a size. It's a million times bigger than I ever was, or even with my 2 co-founders. And it just had limitless need and endless hunger, to the point where I actually, my last year there, I kept track. I worked 11.9 hours a day every single day of the year. That's what it averaged out to, right? When I had my son, I took a grand total of 36 hours of paternity leave. It's a day and a half. So he came out at 2. The next day I took off. The next day after that I was back in the office. I'm not proud of that, but it's really easy to do when you get into these situations. And it's this weird balance, right? It's this weird balance between when you look at, and for the founders in the room, when you look at an employee, I used to keep track of it. Every employee represented about a household with 3.5 people in it. So when I think through those like 600 people that I hired, I mean, that represented about 2,000 people where the money they were making was going home. And when I thought about it, those 100 people that I had to let go of, and not all at once, this was just the nature of the beast. I luckily didn't have to go through any periods of mass cut down. But that was like 350, 400 people that almost all lived in the same town that I went out to eat in, that I would go to sports games in, that I got to go to my house, and that where I was able to pay my mortgage, and maybe they weren't able to. That was really hard. So, I mean, when I think of ACV, I think of really what reorganized my life. So let me talk a little bit about battle scars. I've given a lot of thought of this, right? So I've now been out of ACV about 5 years, right? We went public really 3 years ago almost. So, and the thing I've realized is that like these scars, obviously in the beginning, you notice them, right? The second you get out of your business, you look back and you go, holy shit, like what was I doing, right? Like you're all cut up, emotionally, mentally, sometimes physically. But what I started to appreciate is that, the reminders of mistakes that I made, there were also reminders of just events I had to go through. But they also were hallmarks of how lucky I was to kind of make through it, right? I've talked a lot about in the past, like survivor guilt. You hear that a lot when there's a car crash and, one person makes it and 4 don't, right? Especially when that one person is the driver, it's tough. And I used to think about that a lot as the founder amongst kind of my peers when we all started businesses. We were the only one that made it, and it was tough. It was tough. And it starts to give you a little bit of sense of responsibility. So when I look at these scars and think of these scars, I think about kind of, the luck that, everybody's working hard. It's the luck that brought you there. And kind of the responsibility that you, owe, that you have to do because of that. So I like to always say the cost of wisdom is youth. I'm 39. I get mistaken for 55 much more than I do for a man that needs to get carded. So I think that's just part of what happens. So I'm just going to run through a couple of just the main things. And if anybody has a question, try to keep them until the end, unless it's super burning, and then raise your hand. So scars from birth. I can tell you this. I mean, most of the founders here are not starting their business right now. They've gone through it at some point. And so we could probably line people up and say, what was it like in the beginning, right? And I could say the 2 kind of big things that we came away from, that I came away from this on was, here, let me show you a picture of my team. That's me and my 2 co-founders up there. That was taken when we won a $1 million investment at a startup competition. That was at that point, we had only raised $1 million in pre-seed funding, and it was really hard. I mean, we did this in Buffalo, which there was no venture capital, right? The biggest exit ever was about $200 million. The guy that founded that company was our largest angel, And the next biggest exit was way smaller, and we didn't know that guy. So in order to even raise the money to get us to the point to get in this competition was difficult. But the two things that we really learned in starting this was like setting initial expectations is so important, and no matter who you are, you typically fail at it. I think it's one of the biggest reasons why VCs want to invest is in somebody that's a serial founder that's done it before. Because I can tell you the first time through, we did a horrible job. This was expectations around, how long it takes to understand the people around you. Dan and Joe, Dan I had known probably about 12 years, but he probably maxed out as a drinking buddy over that time. I hadn't worked side by side with him. And Joe I had known about 6 months. He had just moved in from Albany, which is about 3 hours away. His wife was from Buffalo when we started ACV. And what I didn't realize was how important it was to understand people's personalities, to know what their incentives were, and really know how those incentives kind of align. When I talk about in the post-mortem, like one of the big things that I try and tell people is personalities are really like the armor we wear against our fears. And I did not appreciate what these two guys or myself was really afraid of. And it made it really difficult. It made it hard to be able to know what they were thinking, how they were going to act. Everybody knows that, having a co-founder, at least as a one-on-one relationship, a triumvirate and 3 together is difficult. It's easy to become 2 against 1. It's easy to go 1 against 1 against 1, and it's really difficult to keep all 3 in harmony, so it was tough. This came down to everything. The way we split up equity. I was the smallest equity holder amongst the 3 of them, and that was for the pure reason that I had the least money, and I had the most, theoretically, the parallel skill set to Joe, the guy who had the idea. So because I brought the least kind of unique value to the table, I ended up, in the original 100% ownership in the company, I only had 15%. That was poor negotiating on my behalf. I really think I'm a horrible negotiator for myself at this point. But it definitely was something that, it really killed me because I saw equity as a measure of worth rather than just the memorial of a single negotiation. And like that moment, like it didn't really matter, right? Like when ACV IPO'd, I had more money than I would ever really need. I'm not a guy of much means and much need, but it was just kind of like a self-worth thing. And that kind of carried and weighed on me as things move forward. So, and the other important thing is off the bat, like that's technically our head of sales, head of tech. I was the head of everything else, operations, finance, fundraising, stuff like that. But we really didn't align things very well. And so what that meant is when something great was happening and, the limelight was out, all 3 of us kind of tried to push into it. And when it was tough times, sometimes it was, well, whose responsibility is it? It turned into a blame game a little bit, and it made it tough. So I tell people it's so important to understand, like, based on responsibility, who is the one head that's responsible for it. Install early checks and balances, but really assume entropy is going to try and tear everything apart at all times. As things grow, they spread out in kind of organic, gnarly ways. And if you don't put control around that, it becomes super difficult. Okay, growing pains. So after we had started, there's a saying that we used to say, which came from a song around my generation, which is, cash rules everything around me. And that's the way it is in early stage startups, We are a group that raised $351 million in 5.5 years. It was a lot of money. So we raised 8 rounds of funding in roughly every 8 months. Okay. In the beginning, our first 3 rounds were small. I don't think there'd be any investors' names that anybody knew in this room. They were $1 million, $1 million, and $5 million. Then we got in the Bessemer train, which is a fast-moving train, and they shovel a lot of coal, but you got to pay for all of it with dilution. They were a great partner, but when we ultimately IPO'd the company, the 3 of us combined owned less than 5% of it. I don't know if we would have been able to do it, right? And that bottom number is missing 3 zeros. That's supposed to be $4 billion. That was our market cap when we went public. So less than 5% of that number is still a very big number. So growing pains are tough. Part of our Series A, we actually brought in an outside CEO. I, at the time, took it as a sign of failure, like that we couldn't be in harmony together, right? That we had stumbled upon something that was so great. We had like this natural thing, which was this idea. And just to be clear, ACV did not do anything hard, right? We took physical auctions and we just put them on the phone. That was it. We had people go out and look at the product that was being auctioned off. In this case, they were all used cars, so that you could have one honest third-party assessment of what the product was. And we let you bid and launch them from your phone. And we put a lot of people out there, so all you had to do was make a phone call. Someone would show up, take pictures of it, push it out there. It's becoming more common now, but like when we started in 2014, it was really novel. And so we thought we have something so simple, and we couldn't get along that well on it. It was difficult. So some of us would work harder, like just being like, I'm going to outwork everybody else. That was me, and just kind of act like a lone wolf a little bit. And others of us maybe put less into it because they knew the position that they had was enough to kind of support them going forward. It was really difficult. I will also say growing pains. I don't know if this happened to any other founders, but you kind of start to lose who you are a little bit. When you look in the mirror, you see the person who's responsible for X, and you stop seeing the person that played lacrosse in high school, or the person who's got a 2-year-old son that thinks he's the strongest, best man in the entire world, or the person who's the son of your mother, right? You kind of stop seeing that stuff a little bit. And especially as we started to grow, I saw a lot of this happen around me. This luckily isn't a scar I had. They started doing the math. We start getting our Series B and Series D or C. I ultimately left as part of the D. They started saying, well, I own X amount of the company, and the company's worth Y, so I am worth Z. And they were spending things. I'll talk about it in a little bit when we talk about dilution and stuff, but they were spending money they didn't have. And then when we came to the realization that we were supposed to go public in 2020 and that didn't happen, all of a sudden, when you start spending money you don't have, you start acquiring debts you can't pay. And those aren't just financial. Those can be emotional and ego-driven and stuff too. So the big thing I realized was that even though we had titles and even though we were at a certain place on the cap table, the power and influence we really had inside the organization was more dictated by our actions and our results than where we ranked. I ask all the founders in the audience to make sure you look back at the people you have inside your organization without title, without knowing what their salary is, and really make determinations who are the keystones, the linchpins to make sure everything run. We didn't do enough of that. We did not. It really goes into this other segment, which is, honoring early teammates. They sent out a survey before this, and I said, look, I'm happy to talk about whatever. And the number one thing that came back was honoring early teammates, right? My only statement is there's never enough you can do for them, right? If you go online and say, how much equity should I give to, the first head of product or the first head of operations, right? There's the founders, which have an ungodly amount of ownership, and then there's everybody else. And they come out of this thing called a pool, of which has sides and is limited, and it's really not that big. But when you think about the actual time and importance of the time that they put into it, it never ends up being equally weighed. So, when I tell people, like, you're going to regret not giving more ownership, albeit it has to be vested, but to your first employees, I've never been wrong. And I've probably given that advice over 100 times, right? So, and the hard part of it is, giving them not that much, they're still going to work their ass off as hard or harder than you. As much as you don't believe that as the founder, you will get teammates that will ultimately end up being the pillars of the organization. And you want them to be, because someday you're going to leave. Everybody in this room is here because you've taken venture funding or you are giving venture funding, which means there is an expiry. This is not a legacy business that's going to be here for your kids and your grandkids. You are building it to sell it. And you want to make sure it's strong when you decide you leave, or you will not have optionality. So I think it's really important that when it comes to honoring early teammates, and this also goes to like honoring early angels, I can speak, right? I have shown multiple unicorns to a fund. That was an investor in me that I won't name, and gotten blocked from investing in follow-on rounds. So I knew what it felt like, and the same thing happened to us. Our early angels that came in our pre-seed round did not have the opportunity to invest in us again into our Series C. They were blocked from it. They didn't know what they were doing. They were people that supported us, and we honestly didn't know We need to bake in pro rata rights off the bat to these people. You know, I see founders that are so defensive of these, you know, kind of investor-friendly terms, but the truth is, like, you want people around you. You need people to support you. Because I'll tell you what, like, you know, your investors typically, and I'll say this might not go over great, VCs are not your friends. Like, they're not. Like, you might have camaraderie and common alignment with them and kind of, you know, pursuing the same goal. But when you look at the angels that are inside your organization, and I'm biased, I am a direct angel investor in 131 companies, okay? And the reason I did every one of those bets is because I wanted to align with the founder and be there to help them, because I didn't have that. Matter of fact, none of us had that. And a lot of the problems that we ended up having rooted from the fact that there weren't people around us to help us push back to alignment and a common goal. I honestly have no idea how in the hell ACV made it, to be honest. I mean, like, I think we raised the most money. I don't even think we had the best product. I think we just got so lucky with the timing and how simple the transition was, and we just outworked everybody else. But besides that, I mean, when I started writing down all these issues that we had, I was like, oh my God, like, there's no reason we should be publicly traded. And on top of that, one of the few publicly traded B2B companies that are out there today. So, how am I doing on time? Okay. All right, so let me go on from here. Oh, I was supposed to put this black slide up when I said honoring early teammates, because this is ridiculous. I do not have any pictures of our early team at ACV. None. We literally did not take the time to take a picture of the whole organization at any given time until we were over 100 employees. And now looking back on it, that crushes me, because I'll tell you what, we're getting married in May, and a lot of the people that are coming would have been in those early photos, right? They ended up being so important, but like, there's pictures in Dan and Joe and me, you know, my co-founders, galore. You can just Google it, right? But we just didn't even appreciate the other people around us to the point of stopping and saying, hey, you deserve appreciation and admiration too, you know? So this black slide was, you know, kind of in honor of them, which I totally forgot I put in here, so pardon that. I'll try and move through this a little bit quicker in case people have questions. So imbalance is a big thing too, that made things really hard. It's a 0, and it's inside a triangle. And the triangle represents the top of an organizational chart, right? You think about it, your business, you've got the frontline workers, of which is the most of, and you go up and up until you're at the very top. That 0 represents the number of founders in ACV that were in an actual top C-level position at the time we IPO'd. 0. All 3 of us at some point had either been moved down or had left. And so I think the important thing that comes from this is there is like this weird imbalance, right? In the beginning, the people who start the company may not be the ones driving the ship at all at the time you get to any type of exit or any type of death, right? I mean, they're all exits, right? I mean, you know, one you end up with a bunch of money, the other one you end up in the poorhouse, but exits are exits, you know? And the balance was constantly changing. And I will say this, every level up in org chart, I would say this really started around our Series A. Every level up didn't just have more influence, power, and control. It had exponentially more. And I actually think that was an improper way to organize it. I also think that was a byproduct of a couple things. You know, we had a very strong board that held all the cards. You know, conflict was not necessarily appreciated, right? Conflicting ideas, different ways to do things. I can't complain. The thing went public, right? Followed a recipe, got a little lucky, went public. But I will say, as you're thinking about board constitution, once you get to that Series A level and later, you are now, if you're a CEO, you are picking the person that potentially could fire you. And as anybody else, you're picking the people that can influence you getting fired, right? Or move down or shift it over because they know the game. And the truth is, unless you've taken a company from cradle to grave all the way to IPO, it's your first time playing the game too. So you take advice from those people. Imbalance is tough because everybody will overstate their importance and believe it, myself included. I was afraid to leave my company because I thought the whole thing would fall apart. And guess what? It didn't. It ended up being stronger without me. And I will say this, for founders, when you're looking at your organization, there are 2 types of people, those that manage up and those that support down. And I honestly do not think you can be both those people at the same time. One will dominate over the other. The problem is the ones that manage up are maybe as an investor, it's easy to look and say, oh, these are the people I'm hearing a lot of. I understand what's going on. But the truth is they aren't necessarily the one keeping everything cohesive and together. So make sure you're looking at that kind of manage up, support down. And the last thing with imbalance is like it ultimately becomes a double-edged sword. Trust starts to get muddled pretty easy. I know early in our business we really want to be able to. I kind of put a lot of heart into like trusting people, trusting an investor and advisor when I thought that there was an issue or something we could be doing different, right? And sometimes that gets turned against you pretty easily. So this sounds horrible, but like as the company grows, you really have to be careful who you trust. And I recommend having like an outside cabinet of people that understand the business, but are not influencing the business to be able to talk to about it. So one of the last ones is exit wounds. So there's a couple dates up here. November 2014, just to give you an idea how fast this all happens. November of 2014, we incorporated. We had been working on the company for a little while, but we thought we should actually put pen to paper and start this thing. That was actually the same month I found out I was going to be a dad. I found out I was going to be a dad, and about 5 days later, we incorporated. So you can understand maybe why one instigated the other. April 2016, I was originally supposed to take over as CEO of the company. We were having a hard time fundraising given the initial structure that we had. There were internal conversations and debates, and it came out of it that I was able to get a bunch of term sheets when the current organizational structure wasn't allowing for that. So I was going to take over. And then kind of a falling out happened between one of my co-founders and I, one that since both of them have more on the balance sheet than I did, or the cap table than I did, it was kind of, no, you know what, I don't actually want to give up this position. And it kind of created a weird situation of which I had to leave ACV. Super early in the process, right? I mean, you're only talking about a year and a half in. We hadn't done a Series A yet. We had raised $1 million and then won $1 million investment on top of it. May 2016, a month later, I was asked to come back. And I was asked to come back by the board, and that's when the board had decided that we need to pursue an outside CEO because that's the only way because of this structural issue with the way the cap table was laid out to run this. So I actually was a full-time W-2 employee for ACV from when we started all the way until the end of 2018. But from May of 2016 on, from that May of 2016 date till the end of 18, I was actually a consultant. So I held the CFO, COO titles of a company that when I left had 650 employees, something around there, of which more than half directly reported to me. And I still had to punch a clock as a consultant. Doesn't make any sense, does it? But I'll tell you what, in some weird, screwed up way, it worked. January of 2019, that was the first time was approached actually by our lead investor, Bessemer. I had left the company and they said, hey, what do you think about selling some shares? I said, okay. So I'm not there anymore. I had a chip on my shoulder. I had left on my own regard at that point. In 2018, I just realized my son was getting ready to turn 3, and I had spent almost no time with him. And I said, is this really worth it? I said, I'm an early stage guy. This is just not worth it. So I'd left. Bessemer came in. They said, do you want to buy some, or would you sell some shares? I said, sure. I sold about half my ownership at the equivalent of about $4 a share. To give you an idea, ACV trades at about $15 a share right now. And I do not regret it one bit. People go, you could have stayed in it. You could have. Now, the stock got down to a much lower number than that. It's kind of bounced back to 15. They said, you could have made so much more money. And I said, it wasn't worth it. It really wasn't. So in this concept of what is happening with, a lot of people ask, what are secondaries, right? I actually took 2 of them, January 2019 and April of 2020. In January 2019, I sold to Bessemer by half my ownership. It allowed me to go out and give my mom her retirement, pay off her house, pay off my dad's house, buy my brother a car, pay off my house, and feel like I had freedom. I proceeded to take the rest of that money and spend it like a drunken sailor, being an angel investor. I didn't walk away with that much cash, and I was cutting checks, up to $1 million a piece, personally. And that's a real quick way to get an education on what it's like to be an investor is when it's your own money. When they asked me to say, what would you do Wait, hold on. Is there one more slide after this? Oh, yeah. Here's one more thing. Here's when ACV went public. There's not me in the middle. Sometimes people think George is me. That's our CEO. He's a great guy. I'm actually not there. And I'm not there because I didn't get invited. I did not get invited for the company I bore, that I developed most of the internal architecture for, that I spent more time working on than any individual person in there. And it's because I wasn't one of the 50 most important people in the eyes of the management at that time when the company went public. As you could see, this was March of 21. Still protocol rules in the US were kind of out there. That's why everybody else is in masks. It was a tough day for me. It was really hard. Was it great? I mean, we just IPO'd at $4 billion. You know, I still probably had about 30% of my original ownership, 35%. On that alone, I became a rich man, and it was hard. And the worst part is I went through the employee list of our first 50 employees. Outside of my two co-founders, only one other one was invited to that. It was difficult. So what'd I do? Like I said, I was in that era of having more cash than I needed. I went and bought as many bottles of champagne and expensive whiskey as I could, and I drove around and gave them to each one of the 49, well, it would have been 46 people that weren't there. I didn't have a drink with each one of them. That would have been a very bad day. But it just gives you an idea, like when you talk about like honoring early people, like I'm just saying from a founder's point of view, it was crushing, right? This is the reason why I wasn't there for my son's first steps. You know, I wasn't there with so many things that happened to him. My grandmother, that was my second mom, you know, she passed away about a year after we founded the company. I was out of town on work when she died. It was tough. It was really difficult. But look, when it comes to secondaries, all I'm saying is you just need to understand, like, you know, what is enough and how much is enough. You know, people ask me all the time, like, what should I do? And I said, this can all disappear tomorrow. This was way, you know, people didn't believe me as much 2 years ago when valuations were through the roof. But I said, all that has to happen is one event. You know, one company could value a little bit less. One bomb could get dropped. One person can die and your whole life's going to change. My thing is just, you know, decide what enough is and take it off the table when you get the chance. It doesn't matter if it's 3% or 50%. Nobody cares, right? I could just tell you secondaries are a great opportunity, and it's something when you talk to people early on, early investors say, you know, like, what do you think about this, right? You know, I have a wife or I have kids or I have a family, and I want to make sure I'm not worrying about their well-being. Because I can tell you the salary for us was not a ton of money. You know, it wasn't enough to take care of all those people. All right, so this is kind of the end. Well, I got 2 minutes left, so I'll go quick. This is kind of the post-mortem. So this was me. This is my son. This is the day he got to dress up like an Easter bunny, and this is FaceTime because I wasn't there. I could send you 100 of these pictures. In the end, the money really is not the reason why you should be doing this, okay? Because you don't get that back. You don't. It's really difficult. I had a whole bunch of stuff I wrote down, like all this unhealthy stuff, right? Like work nonstop, set poor boundaries, wasn't there for any of the relationships I had in life enough. And I made being a founder an excuse. It was my excuse for everything. Well, I'm founding a company. It's doing great, right? I have to do all this stuff. It won't function without me. And it kept me from really living life over that amount of time. So when I look at what I took out of ACV, you know, really it was for the exchange of 5 years of my life, the majority of it. And you have to think about that. Now, there's way more conversations about work-life balance and emotional health and stuff like that than there ever was before. I mean, we were in Buffalo, New York. It was a city that loves its football team. It loves hockey. It loves drinking beer. It deals with the snow, right? And there wasn't a lot about how are you doing and how are your feelings and stuff like that. You know, and then so what comes from all this? It's the art of healing. You know, putting my family back first again, beginning to dream again, finally starting to take care of myself. You know, to be honest, like I didn't tell any of my family or friends how successful ACV was, right? I moved to Buffalo when we started the company. So back at home, people were like, I don't even know what you do. And I was like, I just run something. Meanwhile, we had just closed a $100 million investment, right? I was like afraid to tell people that. Because I was like, when I realized it, what am I bragging about? I'm bragging about this thing that great, it looks so great on a piece of paper. I can walk into New York and everybody wants to invite me into their office and all that kind of stuff. But the truth was I wasn't happy with the person I was. So it really was a kind of an episode in the art of healing, right? And, that's my son. Everything that I kind of do now, I don't know how many of you founders have kids, but like the truth is you're ultimately doing it to be the best partner you can to your spouse and really for your kids. And if you're single, you should have some other drive or passion in life that you don't give up the whole time. So with the last, I'm over 30 seconds, but I'll finish with this. Why? Why did I give away all the money I had? Now I invested almost all of it, right? But everybody knows like angel bets are not like the most safest bet you could possibly make out there. And you have to have some sense of insanity to do that degree of them. Like I said, I'm a direct investor in over 100 companies. I'm an LP in close to 70 funds. I've been part of a lot of fundraising efforts, primarily for hospitals or for smaller non-for-profits. And, people ask me, like, why did I jump around? Why do I continue to kill myself? I'm full-time, right, at Far Out, and it's not because I need the paycheck. And instead of answering those, I'm going to ask you guys the question, right? Why do you do what you do? Whether you're an investor or you're a founder. Is it for security? Is it for generational wealth? Is it for optionality? Is it because you don't know anything better than how to work? Is it for power? Yeah, and you kind of got to ask yourself that. And I will tell you this. I do what I do because even though I'm a VC today, I will be a founder again. Because I think once you are a founder, there's no going back from it. I wanted to become a VC to be able to be the investor I never had. I wanted to be there for the mentorship, the help, the support, to actually say, I want to be there for you. And even if you're a complete stranger, like any of you guys in the audience, you're all gone through the same hazing ritual of starting a company. You all have to deal with the same loss. You all have the hours that you weren't, a partner or a dad or whatever. And I feel for that. And I think VC's broken, and I'm trying to fix it. So my name's Jack Greco, and thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Wow, I think this was very powerful, very personal. Thank you so much.
Yep.
We have time for 2 to 3 questions, if there are any in the audience. So you two, and then start in the back, go to the front.
Hey, first of all, thank you so much. This has been an amazing talk, probably one of the best I ever heard. I love how honest you are. So let me rephrase this. I've heard a lot of founders say after they sold their company, after they exited, that, I regret not spending enough time with my family, with whatever, and I wish I would prioritize it more. But is this kind of like the planes that came back from World War II, where all the holes were in the wings, and they're like they looked at the planes that came back, not the planes that didn't make it through. Do you think this is kind of like everybody tells the same story? I wish I had done this more, but if they would have done it more, they would not have gotten through.
Yeah. So I mean, look, I think there is a price to admittance of being successful in a startup, right? As a founder, right? And I think there's a lot of things. Let me put it this way. I did not leave ACV to, let's see, how do I want to say this? I was happy I wasn't there at the end, right? Now, I'm not a CFO that should have taken a company public. I'm like a wheeler dealer kind of, I would get on the phone and help the inside sales team. Like, that's not what you want your CFO. So I knew that I wasn't cut out to do that. But I think it's the price of admittance. You just need to know it ahead of time, right? I think it's almost, at this point, like, if I start another company, I'm going to be married, and I'm going to have a strong partner, and I think you need to. Like, talk about unsung heroes. Like, whoever you go home to at night, whether it's a wife or kids or a plant you love or a dog or whatever, there's something that behind you is holding you up. But would I do it again? I would, because I did it young enough in my life, right? I left ACV when I was 35. I was just getting ready to turn 36. And I said, okay, how long does an American male that's not the most in shape guy in the entire world live? Let's say 80 years. So last 10, I'm probably going to be a little worn down. I got like half my life left to do something for this. I would do it again. And I would do it again if the outcome was 0. I just would be more aware of knowing this will end. There is an end. And the truth is, it's a diving board. It's not perpetual. And you kind of got to know when that next step is the one that's going to make you fall off. I think I was lucky enough to not fall, but to jump. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean, I'm talking about starting another company at some point in the future. Maybe it's in 10 years. Maybe it's in 15. I don't know, but I don't think it's out of my system. So it's not that bad.
So this is just a continuation of the previous question, but like if you start another company, what boundaries do you set now that you're like very much more aware of compared to last time?
I think it's more of a dialogue and a conversation with the other people in your life. Like we all have other responsibilities too, you know. And so you got to figure out two things, right? You have to have a dialogue with yourself, like what do I want to save for me? And you got to have a dialogue with the people around me, like what's important for you. I think the biggest thing was I would start with a bigger team. I would give away more equity, and I would just many hands make light work. Like if I go start another company someday, it will be, you know, I will have, I don't know if they'll be co-founders. I don't even love the concept of co-founders because there's a bunch of like, you know, employee zeros I know here that were part of the company but technically not a co-founder. It creates some artificial cliff where like it's okay that I own 20% of a company and you own 0.2. You know, so I would just make it more, it's easy to say, oh, it's going to be kumbaya and everything's going to be great. But I would just put more people in there. You know, I would. And I would try and be, I would almost want to be, in a weird way, I would want to found a company, but almost bring a CEO in at the same time. And so somebody else can have that pressure and I can take some of the air cover off of them and really be the founder. Because I see those as two very different jobs that you just have, you don't get to pick between in the beginning. So that's probably the way I would do it.